That day, I never thought Michael would call. I might have chosen to ignore it if I had known how drastically it would alter things. But I had no clue how his words. I want to talk to you about something would shatter everything I believe to be true, but allow me to transport you back to a time before that. Returning to a family who never truly saw me and a home that never seemed like home. Caroline is my name. I'm just trying to keep everything together as a single mother. Even though I'm far from flawless, I've always done my best for my son. Noah, it's just the two of us for years. That always seemed plenty to me. That is, until I entered that wedding. Amanda's wedding day was just another day in my life that served as a reminder of how unimportant I was to my family. The golden child, Amanda, was getting married to Michael Foster, who was considered to be the ideal man. She made everyone very proud. Everyone coveted her beauty, charm, and way of life. And me, all I ever did was act as the accountant, the person who kept everything organized and did the heavy lifting but never received recognition, the way Mom preferred. And there I was with Noah, seated at the rear of the church. The wedding was not even planned to include me. I wasn't picked to be a bridesmaid. In fact, they didn't consider me a guest at all. I was only there to ensure that nothing went wrong. Amanda was too preoccupied to give a damn. I hadn't even been questioned about the wedding. I was simply completing the missing pieces. Is this really what I've worked so hard for? I asked myself as I stood in the back and watched her smile at everyone while wearing that flawless white dress. To be disregarded. To be viewed as a supporting character in the tale of my own family. Then something occurred. Suddenly, Michael, Amanda's fiancé, and the man everyone thought was too sweet to be true, turned to me and said, "I want you to be the maid of honor." I was unable to even comprehend it. Not while Amanda is still enjoying the high of being the hottest thing. Michael hardly knew me, so I didn't see why he would want someone like me to be engaged. She didn't even want me to be by her side. However, Michael was unlike any person I had ever encountered. There was something almost genuine about the way he stated it. The fact that I was only the pragmatic one didn't bother him. He noticed me, and that meant everything for a moment. However, my mother called the following day. She was enraged. "Why would you allow Michael to make this decision? Amanda's day is being ruined by him," she yelled. And there it was. Amanda was constantly at the center. I had dedicated my entire life to helping Amanda achieve her goals while discreetly burying my own. Michael, though, that wasn't how he saw it. I made an effort to maintain my composure, but I was seething inside. Someone had urged me to participate in something. I wasn't an afterthought for once, but was this where I should be, to take Amanda's place in the spotlight? My mother's icy displeasure weighed heavily on my chest when Noah and I arrived at the chapel. Everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for anything to go wrong, and the air felt heavy. Then it did. Amanda got up to begin her speech during the reception. She discussed family, love, and staying together. She then turned to face me as the crowd's focus changed. "This is my sister, Caroline," she added abruptly. A single mother who has never experienced affection from anyone. It was a slap of words. I gasped. The only sound to break the icy silence in the room was awkward laughter. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't. Noah took hold of my hand beneath the table. I desired to vanish, to flee the scathing remarks. However, Michael, Amanda's fiancé, rose up just as it appeared that the room was closing in. There was silence in the room. And he said it at that moment. I would always remember those words. I can't get married to someone who says things like that. You could feel the shock in the room. People looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what was going on. Michael, however, was not going to back down, even though he spoke calmly. Each word had a punch to it. "I've had enough. I don't want to be a member of this family." Amanda's face turned white. Her idyllic existence was collapsing before her very eyes. Michael turned to face me, and she was unable to even speak. Michael said, "I apologize, Caroline. The first should have noticed it sooner." That was the end of it. The nuptials were over. Michael replied, "Let's go," as he approached me with Noah at my side. It had been a while since I had felt this liberated. Perhaps even prior to Noah's birth, prior to my own life turning into a ghost. However, Michael extended his hand to Noah as well as to me that evening, and I felt important for the first time. I realized that this was just the beginning as we left the area. Far from the ruins of a family I believed to be familiar, they were going to cut us out of their universe. We intended to create our own, it's Odd how quickly things may change, how your life may change in ways you never imagined imaginable with just one choice and one instant. There was silence on the way out of that wedding, with his small face pressed against the window pane. Noah sat calmly in the back seat and gazed out. In the rearview mirror, I could see his image. Even though he was crying and his eyes were red, he had changed. Although a tiny bit of his innocence had vanished, there was still something that gave me hope that all would work out. Michael also remained silent. Although it wasn't uncomfortable, I could feel the tension in the vehicle. We were all waiting, more like awaiting confirmation that this was real, awaiting the end of the storm. Michael's voice was subdued when he eventually broke the stillness. That was not what I wanted to do. Her day didn't need to be ruined. I remained silent. How could I respond? He was discussing more than just the wedding. He was discussing everything. He was discussing the familial dynamic that I had spent years engrossed in. He kept his fingers on the driving wheel and said, "I've been afraid of the consequences of speaking the truth, concerned of losing everything." I gave him a quick look. He clenched his jaw. I didn't press him, even though there was a lot going on behind the surface. Not quite yet. I concentrated on Noah instead. I could tell how much weight his small frame was bearing. The way he made an effort to remain composed despite what he had heard today. "How are you, friend?" I asked in a quiet voice. Noah gave a nod, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't feeling well. And I was devastated by that. I could tell Michael was attempting to restore normalcy when we arrived at the tiny eatery. However, nothing seemed typical. Not after today. We took a seat at a window-facing table. Outside, the sea seemed serene and calm, and I wondered if it had a secret to tell. Perhaps it had healing abilities. However, I was too preoccupied with my own thoughts to notice it. In an attempt to fill the void, Michael cleared his throat. "I apologize for everything. Regarding Amanda and Vivian, I apologize for what they did to you." I stared at him, but I was at a loss for words. I had been battling for my family's acceptance and my position within them for years. But now that I was sitting across from a man who had just revealed everything I had been acting as though I didn't care about, I wasn't sure how to react. I hadn't understood how much I was giving away since I had been so preoccupied with surviving. Then Noah started talking. His voice carried despite its diminutive size. "I don't believe they ever loved you, Mom." The remarks were like a kick to the stomach. He was not mistaken. I turned to face my hands. For how long had I allowed it to continue? How could I have remained silent and hoped that things would magically improve one day? Despite his silence, Michael's eyes remained fixed. He waited for me to respond to Noah. However, I was at a loss for words. I finally broke the hush by saying, "We can't change them, but we are changeable." With wide, somewhat expectant eyes, Noah gazed up at me, and I came to the realization that perhaps there was yet time to start over. Although Michael didn't bring up the subject, I could tell he was thinking about it as well. Unspoken understanding permeated the air between us as we ate in quiet serenity. Michael took us home after the lunch, but this time the ride was different. The uneasy hush from before was gone. It seemed like potential this time. The sort of feeling you get when you know something has altered, but are yet unsure of its direction. With his head leaning against the window, Noah was already half asleep in the rear seat. Something in my chest constricted as I gazed at him in the mirror. I had been trying to shield him from everything for so long, escape the coldness, the lies, and the truth of our family. I believed I was acting appropriately. In actuality, though, I had been deceiving myself. I had allowed parts of myself to be taken away. I had allowed them to diminish me, and I had also reduced Noah's size in the process. Michael's headlights pierced the darkness as he drew into the driveway. However, he gave me a serious look before shutting off the engine. "May I ask you a question?" "Of course," I said, maintaining a calm tone despite my racing heart. "Do you believe? Could we figure this out?" The inquiry weighed heavy in the air, yet his words were tentative, as if he was trying things out. I looked at him for a long time and gave it some serious thought for the first time in a long time. Could we figure this out? Would I ever be able to trust in reality again? I had no idea what the response was. However, I was aware that I was at last prepared to pose the question for the first time. To quit acting as though nothing was wrong. To quit acting as though I didn't desire more. To get out of the shadow cast by my family's expectations of me. At last, I said, "Let's go one step at a time." We both seemed to breathe a little easier for a moment after Michael nodded. However, I was horrified to see a message from my mother, Vivian, as soon as I got out of the car, and it declared, "You cannot ignore this. Everything is being ruined by you." My breath caught. I had no idea where to begin. I had made an effort to be the responsible daughter who looked after everyone. Now, though, I wasn't so certain. "Don't, Mom," I said to myself. However, I felt in my heart that it was no longer simply about her. I had to live my own life. It's strange how you may think you have everything figured out while going about your daily life in the same way. However, something occurs that makes you reevaluate everything. I had that feeling when I read my mother's note, "Everything is being ruined by you." I read it several times, allowing the words to become clear to me. My mother had a knack for making me feel insignificant. I felt as though everything I did was incorrect and that my efforts would never be sufficient. I wasn't going to let her comments rule me this time, though. I let the silence to descend while I gazed at the phone screen, curled up in the back seat, still asleep. Noah's tiny chest rose and fell with every breath. I was careful not to wake him. I didn't want to argue with my mother again. Michael had already entered, presumably to give me time to reflect. However, the more I considered it, the more I understood that I wanted space. There was something odd about Michael, but I wasn't sure where things were headed. He was nice, and I wasn't accustomed to being kind. You see, I had been the glue that held everything together throughout my existence. I had been the one with strength, the one who sacrificed, the one who put her head down and carried out the necessary tasks. After Noah's father left, I raised him by myself. I put a lot of effort into making sure he had all he needed and keeping us afloat. And in the process, I had somehow persuaded myself that this was sufficient. With Michael, though, I wasn't so sure. May I let someone in once more? Could I show him everything that I had long kept hidden about myself? Noah was silent when he awoke, too silent. He seemed to sense the tension in the air, as if he knew something had changed but was at a loss for words. He gently tugged at my sleeve and said, "Mom, are we all right?" My heart ached as I gazed down at him. "Noah, we're all right." Simply. Figuring things out, he nodded, but it was clear he wasn't persuaded. For his age, he was intelligent, sometimes too intelligent. I could be read by him like a book. The days that followed were a haze. Michael and I continued our conversation slowly and cautiously about everything and nothing. We discussed Noah and what family meant to us. However, we also discussed our pasts and our identities prior to this chaotic wedding, and I became more aware of how much we had in common the more I studied him. Even Michael had lost a loved one. Caroline, his sister, had died of leukemia. He gave me tidbits of information, but I never knew the whole tale, how resilient and vibrant she had been, even in her final days. When he believed he had lost all hope, she gave it to him. It brought up memories of my own battle with cancer, how I had worked so hard to hold everything together back then. The people I encountered along the way, however, who recognized me for who I truly was, were the ones who had transformed me, not just the cancer. One evening, Michael informed me, Caroline used to say something, "Family is more than simply blood." She used to remark, "It's the person who supports you when all else fails." My thoughts were racing as I gazed at him. I had always thought that your family was there to protect you and love you without conditions. However, my mother, Amanda, and my family had never taken care of me in that way all these years. Had I been mistaken? Had I been clinging to the wrong individuals? As I watched Noah play outdoors with the neighbors, that question kept coming back to me. He was laughing tonight, whereas he had been very silent lately, genuinely giggling. For a little time, it seemed as though everything would be all right as the sound of his happiness permeated the home. Then my phone rang once more. It wasn't my mom this time. Amanda was the one. I paused and gazed at the screen. There was a part of me that didn't want to answer or confront her. A part of me, though, questioned whether I was prepared for anything she had to say. I replied. She responded icily, "Aaron, we need to talk." But there was also something else in her voice that I couldn't quite identify. "How about?" I asked, using a stronger tone than I intended. "Please, Aaron, avoid doing this. You can't simply abandon everything." Although I could sense the urgency in her voice, I wasn't sure if it was genuine or perhaps a ruse. I added in a low voice, "Amanda, I've already left enough. I've stopped trying to be someone I'm not in order to win your approval. The other end paused for a long moment. I could almost hear the whirl of her mind. Do you not believe that I should be given an explanation? At last, she inquired. I tried to think of the proper words while closing my eyes. Amanda, I owe you nothing. Your decisions have been made, my is my. Furthermore, I will no longer continue to live in your shadow. There was silence on the line. I couldn't tell if she was upset, offended, or just surprised that I had finally defended myself. However, I felt something for the first time in years. Free. I said, one final time, Amanda, I'm not going to keep doing this. I wish you luck in finding what you're seeking. However, I'm finished. I hung up after saying that. It was more than just relief when the burden was removed off my shoulders. I felt as though I had at last taken charge of my life. Although it wasn't flawless or simple, it was mine. Michael was watching me from the doorway when I turned around. His eyes were gentle and perceptive. I wasn't questioned about the call by him. He didn't have to. Are you all right? He inquired. I nodded, feeling more confident than I had in a long time. I finally felt it in my bones and answered, yeah, I'm all right. The problem with change is that even when it has been simmering for years, you never truly see it coming. You believe that everything is under control and that you know where your life is going, then everything changes suddenly. Michael and I eventually discussed what had been lingering between us late one evening. In the distance, the sun was coloring the sky in tones of pink and orange as we sat on the back porch. The home was quiet, and Noah had just gone to bed. It was just the two of us, no drama, no expectations. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, we were alone, trying to figure out what had happened. Are you ever concerned that we're hurrying this up? I asked, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. Michael looked at me thoughtfully. What are you rushing? I said, looking down at my hands. Us. I had begun to pay attention to the small things in my life, like the softness of his voice when he spoke to Noah, the way the sun fell on his face, and the warmth of his hand when it touched mine. Everything was so fresh, so unlike anything I had ever let myself experience. He spoke softly. We've both been through a lot. However, that does not preclude us from taking our time. No, Caroline, the first not leaving. And I believed him for the first time. There was no hurry. Everything didn't have to fit into a predetermined mold. It was sufficient that we were both getting better and discovering our desires. As the last of my uncertainties vanished, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had been scared for so long, frightened to be vulnerable, afraid of getting hurt again. Michael, however, was not like the others. I wasn't expected to be flawless by him. He wasn't requesting that I give up my life for him. He was simply there. I gave myself permission to hope for the first time in a long time. The weeks that followed were more subdued. Noah was improving. He had begun to laugh a little more, talk to me more, and even make new friends at school. He was gradually returning to the boy I knew before all the family drama, and I could see the change in him. Then, one afternoon, something occurred that completely altered the situation. My phone buzzed as I was working through some figures for a new client at my desk. It was a message from my mother, Vivian. She hadn't contacted me since the disastrous wedding. Since I had been avoiding her calls, I reasoned that perhaps she had finally come to terms with the fact that I would no longer be her punching bag. Before I opened the message, I paused. We must speak. Time to make things right. As I read the lines, my heart began to rush. I wanted to push it aside and keep going on without turning around. However, I also realized that I couldn't run indefinitely. Family is like that. No matter how far you go, they always manage to invite you back. I inhaled deeply before answering. Mom, I don't know what you think has to be fixed, but I've changed. I will not return to our previous situation. No answer came right away. I assumed she was thinking about the message after reading it. However, a few hours later, I received a call. I was unwilling to respond. I didn't want her to feel as though she could still manipulate me. However, I did. Vivian's voice was as piercing as ever as she said, Caroline, I've been contemplating. You might be correct. Perhaps I've been unkind to you. You are still my daughter, though. I also wish to put things right. I wasn't sure if I should believe her. In order to make me feel like I was at fault, my mother had always twisted things to make me feel guilty. This time, though, there was something different in her voice, almost as if she was genuinely attempting to set things right. I said, I don't need you to fix anything. All I ask is that you accept me for who I am, not for what you believe I ought to be. The person on the other end of the line paused for a while. I apologize. Caroline, I have always encouraged you to emulate Amanda, but now I see you're not her. And perhaps that is okay. I had never heard her acknowledge her mistake before, and I felt as though a burden had been removed. I was no longer carrying her expectations for the first time in my life. With a tiny smile pulling at the corner of my lips, I answered, perhaps it's time to stop trying to make me into something I'm not. Mom, I will not change for you. However, I won't exclude you either. I want us to proceed, but according to my terms, Vivian was silent for a while. Finally, she said, all right, I'll give it a shot. I felt as though a chapter in my life had ended with that. It wasn't flawless. It would not be simple. However, it was a beginning. Michael and I sat down on the couch later that night after Noah had gone to bed, the soft murmur of the night enveloping us. You've changed, he murmured in a calm, kind voice. You no longer have to bear the burdens of everyone else. I nodded as I finally felt a change in myself. Indeed, I'm becoming better at letting go. Michael extended his arm and touched me. You don't have to travel this long road alone. And I believed him for the first time in a long time. Both of us were beginning again, together. The sensation of the air was different, perhaps lighter. Finally, piece by piece, the weight of everything I had been carrying for so long began to lighten. I was beginning to think that perhaps, just possibly, I could have something genuine, something that was unique to me and unconstrained by other people's expectations. It wasn't like everything was ideal all of a sudden. That isn't how life is. But suddenly there was a calmness that I had never experienced before. Over the past 3 months, Michael and I have been working to rebuild our lives as well as our relationship. Noah, too, was evolving. Even though he was still my tiny boy, I could see him developing in unexpected ways. He was more self-assured and authentic. At school, he had discovered a space that seemed like his own, and he was truly happy for the first time in a long time. What about me? At last, I was beginning to live for myself. I had launched my own company, something I never would have imagined having the courage to undertake. Michael had given me encouragement and given me hope that I was more than a supporting role or caregiver. I did what I did well. I had anything to contribute, despite its diminutive size. Johnson Financial Services was mine, and I took pride in it. I had Noah at my side the entire time. His small face would perk up anytime he saw the new office signs go up, and he would bring me coffee in the mornings. It seemed as though we were both creating something, not merely a company, but a future. A day in the future when I wouldn't have to conceal my identity or feel guilty for desiring more. Michael dropped off something at the workplace one afternoon. He stuck his head around the door while I was typing at my desk. His eyes lit up in a way that made my heart skip a beat, and he smiled when he spotted me. Are you busy? He leaned against the doorframe and inquired. Always. I answered without raising my gaze. You are aware of how it is. Paperwork never stops. He came over and sat on the edge of my desk after laughing. He started. I was thinking, and I gave him a questioning glance. This has been going on for a while, all three of us. What are your thoughts on formalizing it? Uncertain of where he was taking this, I scowled. What is being made official? Nathan, you and IA household, the meaning of the words hung in the air. This was not what I had anticipated, I knew. Though, as I glanced at him, what we had been constructing was this, not merely a company, not only a collaboration, a family. However, I said quietly, I don't know what the future looks like. However, we have already begun. So I am aware of this. We already have a family. Everything felt fine when he smiled, that sweet, gentle smile. You're correct, he responded in a friendly voice. We are. We took Noah for a walk along the water later that night after work, for a brief time. I thought that everything was at last in its proper position as the sun was lowering and bathing everything in a gentle glow. With his eyes glimmering with enthusiasm, Noah told us about his most recent school project. Michael and I did nothing except listen. It was simple, it was quiet. However, there was another element present as well, something fresh, I hope. I hadn't given myself permission to feel that type of hope in years. It was the type of hope that assured me I didn't have to return to my former self. I no longer had to struggle for acceptance. I could just be myself, and it was sufficient. Michael turned to face me as we watched Noah toss a rock into the water, his fingers lightly touching mine. I never really thanked you, he said in a serious tone, for everything, for allowing me to try. I looked at him and shook my head, feeling the weight of everything we had experienced together. You were not required to. We both made the decision to try, which is why we are here. We both made the decision to proceed. Additionally, I no longer felt like I was only getting by for the first time. I felt as though I was alive. As if I had an option, I took a seat next to Michael that evening while we were getting used to our new house, and Noah was dozing off on the couch. Even though we were still in the early stages of this new chapter in our life, I no longer felt afraid. I wasn't fighting for the first time. I wasn't having any trouble staying afloat. I was simply in this place. And I was all right, I muttered. I never thought it would be like this. As Michael bent down to give me a gentle forehead kiss. However, I'm happy it is. And I felt like I belonged for the first time in my life, a true future, a true family, just the two of us going forward together. Not everything in life goes as planned. Occasionally, we spend years seeking acceptance, prioritizing the needs of others over our own, and giving up aspects of who we are in order to conform to the expectations of others. The reality is that you don't have to continue living that way. We start to regain our power when we start making choices for ourselves and ultimately stop caving in to the expectations of others. Redefining. Who you are and what you deserve is something you can do at any time. Being authentic with yourself, letting go of the past, and believing that you are sufficient just the way you are more important than being flawless or having everything worked out. Keep in mind that true family is more than just blood. It's about the people who see you, encourage you, and stick by you no matter what. Letting rid of the things and people who are holding you back can often give you the strength to move forward. You are free to put your own satisfaction ahead of other people's expectations, to choose joy over duty, and to choose calm over turmoil. You can live your truth without waiting for approval. Now is the moment to live the life you have always earned.